So hello everyone, I want to talk today about scientific knowledge and what is actually scientific knowledge, and in particular I want to look at a research article that says how many scientists does it take to have knowledge. But at first we look at this kind of diagram. So the scientific method as an ongoing process. So it seems like many people imagine that we first make observations, and that's the question, of course, what do I see in nature? And so we somehow try to then come up with questions. Why does that pattern occur? What do we actually observe? Then we formulate a hypothesis. What are the general causes of the phenomenon I'm wondering about? We develop then a testable prediction. So what can we expect from the hypothesis? And now we start gathering data, relevant data, and so on. We refine or alter or reject our hypothesis. And as a final step, we actually develop a general theory. Now, that seems to be a very easy scheme of how we do sciences. But I think this is just a simplification of how it works. And what I find interesting in that regard are like the deeper contemplations about what knowledge actually is. And I found this interesting article by Joran de Ridder. How many scientists does it take to have knowledge? So this article actually points out that contemporary scientific research, especially in most of the STEM disciplines and the social sciences, is massively collaborative. And that actually changes the structure of knowledge so that maybe individuals don't know knowledge anymore. So, and if we look, and this is what the article points out further, in university science labs, typically they consist of teams of researchers, and collaboration often extends also to other departments and universities. So we have an increase of co-authorship. For example, it points out that from 2016 to, I believe, or actually from 1996 to 2015, the average number of authors increased from 3.2 to 4.4. And I think this trend just went on. So the actually percentage of articles that were just authored by a single author went down to 12%. And then the most interesting number is certainly that in 2011 we saw over 6,000 papers with more than 100 authors and 146 with more than 1,000 authors. And the physics paper of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN published a paper that has had in total 5,154 authors. Now, the question is, why do these need so many authors? And it is indeed needed. So the major point is that scientific knowledge in collaborative contexts, or that scientific knowledge needs collaborative contexts. There's like one example where the text discusses the development of a new drug that needs statistical knowledge, that needs knowledge about how to make surveys, how to design the drugs, how to implement it in practice. It needs doctors and so on and so forth. And nobody could do that by themselves anymore. So, but then it starts right before with examining the old definition of knowledge. And of course, it is again like a version of what we know as the classical idea of knowledge, and that is knowledge is warranted true belief. So it does not say justify, but warranted, where warranted is general epistemological good-making property that makes the difference between a belief being merely true and its constituting knowledge. So in other words, it shouldn't be true by luck and by a lucky connection, but it should be reliably produced or on the base of good grounds. So why is scientific knowledge held in such regard? What sets it apart from scientific knowledge? For one thing, it is knowledge produced through scientific research. That's certainly true, but it tells us little about what is supposed to be good about scientific knowledge. A better starting point is the thought that scientific knowledge is high-grade knowledge. So what is high-grade knowledge? That is knowledge that satisfies demanding epistemic standards. Now, of course, what are these demanding epistemic standards? Well, he just gives an idea that knowledge does not have to be certain, because quantum mechanics or the standard model of particle physics are among the most firmly established results of science. They are not like as certain as my knowledge that a cup of coffee is on the table or that 2 plus 2 equals 4. But again, so scientific knowledge is the most reliable knowledge we have about certain subjects matters. But the question is still, what does make it reliable? Non-scientific methods for forming beliefs about such matters tend to be unreliable. Just consider the many false beliefs that people have had throughout the ages about the origin and age of the universe, about the ultimate constituents of reality, and so forth. Scientific knowledge is not infallible, but somehow we say it's more reliable. But again, the question is, what is the standard for this reliability? And it seems it is solid evidence. Okay, I take this sentence here, but actually the sentence says something else. It is still the case that it is estimated that half of the scientific knowledge that we have is not true. So the question again is like, how do we justify knowledge claims, and what do we take a high scientific reason that makes us accept scientific knowledge? So having scientific knowledge requires having access and grasping the reasons why your beliefs are likely to be true. This is why consulting an oracle that reports true claims with perfect reliability would never produce scientific knowledge. Now, what comes here to mind is that multi-authored publications have become the default. So in a sense, like the standard for scientific knowledge is not that an individual like produces the reliability and robustness anymore, that somehow like one must say scientific knowers justify their claims by somehow being embedded in a community. So how does that work? The scientific teamwork in scientific research is due to the division of tasks among team members, each contributing essential expertise and skills. So teamwork is practically necessary. The real knowing subject is not the individual anymore. And he gives some examples. For example, the Human Genome Project that had the purpose of identifying the more than 3 billion chemical units, nucleotides in human DNA. And this kind of massive collaborative project took about 15 years, from 1985 to 2000, and involved research teams from 20 universities in the United States, Europe, and Asia. The sheer amount of work required to complete it in a necessary collective teamwork. So in other words, teamwork is cognitively necessary. So in the following, the article actually asks, what is collective knowledge production? And I mean, like, collective knowledge seems to be weird. So the question is collaborative produced scientific knowledge considered collective knowledge? Is it like individual knowledge? Like, is it depending on individual knowledge? Because the traditional conception of knowledge is that knowledge involves an individual. So, for example, Philip Kitcher says knowledge is located in or processed by an individual. But he gives here the example. So I ask one friend to count the people outside, like at a party, right? So let's be a little bit more precise here with regard to that example. Let me just read it, therefore. Where is the example? To see that, suppose I'm trying to find out how many people are attending my party. I ask one friend to count the people outside, another those in the living room, and a third those in the kitchen. They report back to me and I add numbers. Does this arrangement make my knowledge of the number of party people collective knowledge? I'm inclined to think not. It seems more accurate to say that I individually know how many people are at my party, even though my friends helped me obtain this piece of knowledge. This worry prompts me to add some clarification. First, the terminological part. Why precisely should the fact that multiple individuals were involved in producing a piece of knowledge not be enough to call the resulting knowledge collective? The term does not have a strictly delineated or clear meaning in everyday usage or academic philosophy. So we have some flexibility in fixing its exact meaning. perhaps collective knowledge as collectively produced knowledge is not the most theoretically interesting sense of the term, but I don't think there are strong reasons to resist this usage either, as long as we were clear about what we mean. So I think the major point that he makes here is that groups don't have mental states, but the concept of collective produced knowledge and collective knowledge is not meaningless because we have statements like, where is it? I didn't mark it, but he says something to the effect that Google knows everything, or the jury knew the facts, or that we claim that algorithms of Facebook have some type of knowledge. So let's read the final part of this, therefore. This still has consideration. The practical and cognitive necessity of teamwork in science provides what I take to be the strongest reason to see scientific knowledge as collective knowledge. That knowledge just happens to be produced by a collective might not be enough for real collective knowledge, but if realistically couldn't have been otherwise, we do get collective knowledge. Hence, the first sense in which a lot of scientific knowledge is collective is that it is knowledge that is collectively produced, where this could not have been otherwise for reasons of practical or cognitive necessity. So I think what he says here is that collective production of knowledge is necessary in scientific context. So nobody could work by themselves anymore, especially in the fields of nature when it comes to questions of quantifying the or saying what is the human genome. So as that is needed, we have to recognize that there is something like collective knowledge, even though it does not apply to individual mental states. So yeah, I think there's a case that there exists knowledge without an individual possessing that kind of knowledge. And that's an interesting idea, right? So from the production of collective knowledge, it comes now to the question, what are the warrants? And we go back again to the definition that knowledge is defined as warranted and true belief. So for scientific knowledge, warrant involves explicit evidence, reasons, data, observations, analysis, and as he says here, inferences. So he gives an example then in interdisciplinary research. We have, like, for example, political scientists that want to predict the results of an election, and then you have computer scientists that handle the collection and process the data, and political scientists who interpret the data and provide the context. And each group thereby relies on the expertise of the others, and it makes it impossible for individuals actually to grasp what is really going on. So the full warrant for the research conclusions requires understanding both technical and contextual evidence that no individual just possesses by themselves. This means that the collective of scientists has high-grade scientific knowledge, as no single individual can fully appreciate relevant evidence. So this is what he called before high-level knowledge, right? So that means that when we basically compare individual and collective knowledge, this is what he does next, then we see that individuals outside the team can learn about the conclusions, but only gain testimonial knowledge, not the full high-grade scientific knowledge. And this is also, in a sense, what I believe is my knowledge about evolutionary theory and why I decided to believe it, especially with respect to Darwin. Now, I cannot disprove somebody who has individual knowledge and can basically defeat me. But I just say I decide to rely on the larger scientific collective because they produce something that is high-grade knowledge. And that involves that they have, of course, direct access to and understanding the evidence to a limited degree, which the team collectively possesses, but which the individual never can fully grasp. And there's a practical and cognitive necessity to actually do that. So we need to do that because otherwise we cannot produce knowledge anymore in our day and age. So collaboration might be required due to time constraints, even if individuals could theoretically access and evaluate all evidence alone. Even in practically necessary collaborations, collective knowledge can arise because individuals rely on their team for evidence and expertise. So yeah, and then we come to the third collective knowledge, that is a certain kind of functionality. So here it basically points out that this kind of collective knowledge has functional roles in our practical lives. So if you have knowledge, you can stop inquiry unless you get further reasons to doubt it. Knowledge is stored in memory and so on and so forth. I mean, this here he still talks about normal kind of knowledge, yeah? So there is a practical use. Knowledge informs practical and theoretical decisions. Knowledge allows us to make assertions, and knowledge serves as a base for action. Scientific knowledge, to be then more precise, has many of these same functional roles. So there's a certain kind of analogy or similarity. And established scientific knowledge, for example, like the knowledge that we have about the Higgs boson, ends the need for repeated experimentation and shifts focus to new questions. Scientific knowledge is preserved in papers, books, and digital repositories, and it is used in deliberation. It supports further theoretical and practical deliberation, such as building on previous proofs or devising new research projects. Scientific knowledge allows also scientists to make assertions, and it supports them for further actions. So we see here a lot of similarity between how we use individual knowledge and scientific knowledge. And he has also here an example: without knowledge of general relativity, our GPS systems wouldn't be at all accurate. Without systematic empirical study of hiring practices, we cannot know whether there's gender or racial discrimination in hiring and whether and how we should do something about it. So the individual is not capable of processing that, but the function of scientific knowledge does something for our society, where we rely on that kind of scientific knowledge that then supports our actions. So we have collective and functional roles. Research teams and scientific communities use and function with knowledge similar to individuals. So the point is really that we want to say it's not an individual that carries that kind of knowledge, but groups. And he gives some examples that research teams collectively produce and validate scientific knowledge. Teams manage and utilize stored knowledge, and teams use knowledge for decision making and planning. So the parallels are then clear. Scientific knowledge functions for collectives like individual knowledge does for individuals, and the argument draws on the functional similarity between individual and collective knowledge, comparing it to how objects or systems are categorized based on their function. Of course, there are limitations to that, but we can extend concept based on functional similarity in other domains more liberally than that. So why would knowledge be an exception? So we can do that. That's actually his point. Yeah, and then just come to the conclusion. Much of contemporary science is carried out collaboratively. Although individuals are still involved, groups are often the primary agents in the scientific endeavors. Therefore, we develop collective knowledge, which comes in three senses. Collective knowledge is produced knowledge, knowledge that is produced by a group because of cognitive demands and individual couldn't handle it. It is warranted by collectives. That means that knowledge for which the required high rate warrant is held and can only be held by a collective. So individuals cannot do that by themselves, although they would be theoretically capable of doing it. And then we also have functional roles, that collective knowledge functions for society in the same way as individual knowledge functions for individuals. And of course, these senses are overlapping. But overlapping. A single piece of scientific knowledge can be collective in multiple senses simultaneously. For example, knowledge produced through necessary collaboration often has collective warrant and fulfills various functional roles. So he also comes up with some further considerations. There may be additional ways to understand collective knowledge, such as through formal and informal group decision making or less demanding conditions of belief. There's an ongoing room for exploitation, but the most important conclusion that he comes up with in the end is that the myth of the lone genius has probably to be dismissed in sciences. The idea of the solitary scientific genius is largely outdated in contemporary science. Scientific knowledge is primarily developed and possessed by groups rather than individuals. Now, the conclusion is very interesting because the question is, does that take the responsibility from us? Can we actually obtain knowledge about, let's say, climate change, or about whether we need electric cars, or what kind of procedure should be done on our body in hospitals, if we cannot decide that as an individual anymore? Like, how should democracies function, and so on and so forth. So the transition to scientific knowledge as collaborative or collective knowledge seems to be a very important factor in our societies. And I would be interested how you look at it. Have you ever thought about that aspect, or do you say, yeah, that's what it is? That's exactly what we should do. So let me know if you really watch this video. Thank you very much. And just to say, for this article, I just want to mention the author again. It was an interesting article to read. It actually expanded a little bit my knowledge, my individual knowledge about collective knowledge. So Joran de Ridder, interesting article. Thank you very much. For the rest, subscribe, live long, collect more knowledge, and prosper.